All right. All right. All right. So, yeah, my talk is In Pursuit of Open Source. This is a talk kind of based on the blog post I wrote 2 months ago. So I'm Henry Zhu. You might know me as LevPad on Twitter, and I'm also HZOO on GitHub. I just say this because I found out there's another Henry Zhu that's also a developer, and I met him the last time I was in San Francisco. So in this talk, I'm just going to be talking about my story of how I got involved in open source and some of the thoughts I have now that I've left my job and trying to do this full time. And I guess part of it is just to say that throughout this process, I didn't inherently like open source. It's just something that I had to cultivate a love for. So like a lot of people, the way I started out with open source or GitHub is like you write your code on your own, and you kind of just upload it and then never look at it again. There's no stars, there's no forks, there's no commits or issues or pull requests. You kind of just put it up there. Yeah, eventually you might go to a hackathon, which I did when I was in college. And in this particular hackathon, I didn't even code at all. I think I helped someone else pair program, and I didn't know how to use Ruby, and they started using all these words like Puppet and Chef and Nagios. So I had no idea what these words were. And so I was kind of using open source, but not understanding that I was using it at all. And I wouldn't even think about who are the people maintaining these projects, or what companies are they at, stuff like that. But this is where I learned, not through open source, but just working on a team, just how fun it is to collaborate with other people. Eventually started work, and I was really into Angular at the time, and I really wanted to get into open source. And so I found there was an issue about updating the linting in the project, and somehow, I thought that was interesting, so I manually fixed all the linting errors. This is before Prettier and ESLint fix. And so I ended up getting number 22 on the Angular 1 code base just because I changed all the styles. And the funny part is that Igor, one of the maintainers, he told me, you got to make a different commit for every style change. I was like, oh, that's great, because then now I can have even more commits. Because that's what I cared about at the time. And so I was like, okay, this thing is pretty cool. And what happened was I got so involved in the project that I was using to find the style issues called JSCS that I didn't look at Angular again, and I started getting involved in that instead. And I mean, this is crazy, but I basically got more involved and became more of a main contributor, and I actually got a job offer, just random email from Joel. He's like, hey, do you want to move to New York? And I'm from Georgia, so I had no idea anything about New York. I was just like, oh, some random place. But yeah, I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And yeah, and then somehow I went over there because I thought they cared a lot about open source, and they have a really good team. And the day I joined, they added me to the core team, which was really cool. And through that process, I learned there are other projects out there, and I realized that all of us were kind of feeling burnt out and trying to deal with open source. And so one of the cool things I did a while back was merge a project together, which is a really hard thing to do because it's totally non-technical. It's how do we deal with people wanting to make sure that their project is surviving as their baby. It's my first taste of what it looks like to be a maintainer. In the meantime, I found out about Babel. This was after it got changed from 6 to 5. And I remember James and Sebastian, they wrote blog posts for the 6.0 release. And they mentioned some people, and I don't know, I saw whoa, why is my name there? I think I did 2 PRs or something, and they're just wow. And that was really encouraging to me. And so it kind of led me to look into the project more. And then I realized later, they gave me the commit right and publish rights, but I didn't publish a package before. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I kind of got I guess it feels like I accidentally just became a maintainer. I was just like faking it as I go, just like see what happens. But what happened was it got a little crazy. So this is from 2012 to 2017. Yeah, I got a little obsessed. And I started thinking like, how much time am I actually spending on this? Like, was open source kind of like an idol to me? It became this unhealthy obsession, or was it just my passion? Is this really something I want to do? And it was hard to tell if it was just like consuming me or it was just like a fun hobby, and clearly it wasn't. And I think looking back, this kind of shows like the graph itself shows something that it's not neutral. Like it changes how you act, and like it makes sense that GitHub removed like the streaks and stuff like that because it causes people to care about like how many commits they have versus like I guess their well-being. And so it became more of a burden instead of an inspiration. So now that I'm obsessed, what does it look like to like pursue like full-time maintainer? Like where did that idea even come in my head? And so what happened was after I started working at Behance, I joined because I thought I'd be working on open source a lot, but I joined a product team. And so there wasn't always time, there's deadlines. And eventually I just realized like I'm spending all my time at work and then going home and doing open source. And I was wondering, well, we're using it at work. Why would we wait for me to like fix it at home when you could just pay me to do it at work? So I asked my boss if I could work on it full time, and they said no, but they said you could work on it half time. I was like, okay, wow. And after that, I just like kind of shut up. I was like, okay, that sounds good. And so for like about a year after that, it was still a struggle because you're still like doing half your time with work and then open source, and I always felt like guilty, like, oh, now I'm doing open source. It's not as important as the other part of my job, even if they told me that that was my job. And just trying to manage that and having deadlines, and sometimes I wouldn't do open source at all, and other times I would do all open source because it was low in like what we're working on. And so I kind of like a while back I said I was just gonna kind of stop to just think more about like whether I really want to pursue this. And so this what if question of like whether I should become or do this full time, like I took it more seriously instead of just kind of thinking that it's like a dream or like, when you think it's a dream, you're like, oh, it's just gonna happen, or like, oh, that's impossible. You kind of don't even take it seriously. But at that point, I don't know. I thought more about like, okay, have other people have done this? I talked to Evan of Vue.js. He told me, yeah, totally quit your job. I just did it. And Battle's more popular than Vue, so you should totally do it. And I kind of didn't listen to him for like a while. And just doing the due diligence of like looking like, how do I deal with health insurance and like selling and taxes and all this stuff. Things I would never really want to consider, but I don't know, it made it seem more real, even though obviously it's not easy to do. And like 2 months ago, I decided to leave my job and to try to pursue this open source, whatever that looks like. And I don't know, I guess looking at all the negatives or the what ifs, in the end, I think that doesn't help you make a decision. It's more that, I don't know, like you have to take a leap of faith at some point, and yeah, just hope that's gonna go okay. But yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone that's supported me on Patreon and all the feedback. It's just really cool to see like the community just be so supportive and helpful for what I'm trying to do. And so yeah, now what? Am I just free to do whatever I want? Yeah, I mean, a few days after, I'm just like, I don't even want to look at this anymore. It's still scary. But I don't want to just think about how to do open source. Yeah, I want to figure out like what does it mean to like live out open source in terms of like the values and principles that it represents. There's nothing wrong with just scratching your own itch and like making your own thing, but I think there's a certain, I guess, vision of open source that I'd like to see, and that's something I want to do. And I found that like through working on it, even though I got started through code, the part of open source that I liked the most were the non-technical things. And so it's like, how do we use our freedom to help people? Yeah, I'm reminded of a verse in 1 Corinthians where he's trying to say that basically, he's free to do anything. And just like as an open source maintainer, you're free. No one's like making you, you're not obligated to do it, but you choose to, limit your own freedom. You choose to serve others. I think that's a good posture to take while we're thinking about doing open source. And that there's an expectation here that it's going to require sacrifice. It's going to be hard. It's not just everything's going to go okay and it's really easy. So, but the problem is that, yeah, we do feel really guilty. We feel trapped. I'm free in a certain sense, but in my own mind, I can feel really trapped. Like maybe I feel this default sense of fear. Like even closing an issue for someone is like scary because they're gonna get mad at you or something like that. And maybe you feel like you're tied to a project, you can't leave the project. You feel like you can't take a vacation, you can't take a break, and you're just putting all this pressure on yourself. But we're not obligated to do that, right? If you're working open source at work, well, you have work hours, and you shouldn't have to work on it outside work. And if it's not your job, then you can walk away entirely, and it should be okay. And I guess a lot of my point is that open source reflects who we are, just like a lot of things in life. And it shows in our character at an individual level and a community level. And it just so happens that a lot of open source is online. And so this shows up in a lot of ways. Like, we have like instant messaging, instant delivery, instant pizza, and now I guess people expect like instant open source answers, right? This guy just like joined our Slack room, pasted like an error message, and like didn't even ask like I don't even know I don't know, I have no idea. And this is really real. I find myself going on Twitter and then knowing that there's nothing there, closing and opening again, and same with GitHub and everything else. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Do I want to, I need to know how many likes there are, or retweets, or the first thing to know about the new JavaScript framework that came out. Or I search Babel on Twitter to see all the comments that people have and try to respond to them because they're complaining. I need to make sure that I defend what it's about. Yeah, there's a lot of entitlement. I saw another comment that someone said, a year later, it said, it's been 2 years. I was like, okay, cool. And you get really mixed responses. I made this really long deprecation message for Babel preset 2015. I know that it kind of was really weird. So this guy's really happy, and he's like, oh, this is great. And then other people, they make issues that report that, what was this? Horribly obnoxious, which is fundamentally spam. Wow. And do we just reduce everything to a number? We like talking about how many downloads does Babel have, or how many dependencies does it have, or what are all of our users, and how many stars do we have? Is that really what we're trying to do here? And does that show the kind of day-to-day, behind-the-scenes, normal, average work that people are doing? And just like email, we tend to think of our issues as just numbers. The people asking for help, these are all just numbers that we're trying to make that go down to 0. And obviously I can't, deal with 800 issues. And at the same time, GitHub feels a little transactional. It's hard to build a relationship with people where everyone is online, or they're anonymous, or you don't even know their name. It's just some screen name. You forget that behind the other side, whether you're a maintainer or contributor, that's another person. The nice thing is that GitHub hasn't taken it that far, where they got rid of the streak, but yet there's other apps that are trying to let you pay money so that you can keep your streak, which is pretty crazy. There's always a feeling of being on call. And I have to tell myself to take breaks, that I can still be in control of how I'm spending my time. You always have this urge to check GitHub or whatever it is. But it's also just there's an expectation that you have to be there at every second. Maybe you go to sleep and then you like wake up and there's like 100, comments that says like you broke everything. Um, yeah, and I like to focus on just doing work instead of thinking about like my own pride or like how people think of what I'm doing. But why is it so hard to think that way? And what's the cost of having to deal with all of this? Moms always have good advice, right? Yeah, I realized, I've been dealing with all these health issues, and it's like, I believe I have to do certain things, like exercise, eat healthy, but I'm not doing it. And I might believe in like creating a better community, but I still find I'm still thinking about myself. If something is so important to me, then why am I not spending the time to think about and do those things? And I think a lot of it has to do with our habits. When we continue to act, those active habits are strengthened, but then the ones we don't do, they're weakened. And so you might keep saying all these things, I want to do all this stuff, but I never actually act. So I think something I'm trying to think about more, like, what are the rhythms and rituals that we have in open source? Whether it's like doing blog posts or celebrating someone's first PR, these things are habits that shape how we are, and they're not neutral. They build and frame how our character. They're not things that we just do, they do something to us. And I want to think about more, what's the kind of story that those actions point toward? Is it a story of building people up, of hospitality, stewardship, creativity, charity? Or is it more about me, about numbers, about transactions, about all these other things? So these are all really non-technical, hard questions to answer. And maybe I don't really know what we're supposed to do. I want to think about how to work on that. Maybe it's just bringing in more whimsy. More Guy Fieri. I don't know. Maybe we're supposed to just give out stickers, and that makes it better. But I have stickers, by the way, so come talk to me after. Or even cooler is you take a piece of satire about a person, make a PR for it, get it merged, and then make a T-shirt out of it, and then meet the person that made the satire. So that was me and Jordan right here. Or even cooler, Angus is here, I think. So he wrote an official song for Babel, which you should totally listen to. And I think I want to think about maintainers as not just people that tell you what to do. Like, we have all these good first issues, and you should do them, but ultimately, I think we want to inspire you to be the ones that push those changes, to just be people that guide others to figure out what they actually like. I think that coming up with these issues ourselves only takes us so far. And maybe more face-to-face, and I'm thinking maybe we should make a meetup in New York where we just contribute or talk about open source, or maybe we're doing more live streaming or video calls instead of just like GitHub issues in Slack. Doing more community shout-outs. People really feel encouraged when they do their first PR and they get recognized for it. Or participating in Summer of Code programs to bring other underrepresented groups into open source. And also just shouting out to existing people that are already doing great work. Brian also helped me do this slide deck, because otherwise it would have been like all screenshots and just white background. And encouraging regular rest, learning how to take breaks, taking prolonged time away, learning how to step down when it's necessary. The way I want to think about it is restoring how we are through restoring what we're doing. And one example of this is a really good blog post by Steve talking about how open source maintainers are like gardeners. That's an interesting metaphor to use, that we become gardeners, stewards, not just of code itself, but of community, and giving people an opportunity to create things. It's a really good quote. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless enmity of the sea. and to show that it's not just like triaging issues and doing all these what are considered mundane things, but to inspire people to show that like those small things are the things that bring open source to greater heights, and to just inspire people. So open source shapes our character. So the question is, what is open source teaching us to pursue? Is it changing us in the ways that we want? And if not, then where can we actually change? Lastly, here's my Patreon. If you want to support Babel or me, you can donate to our Open Collective. Thanks.